Now this video is going to be dedicated to painting plastic parts. We're going to use a motorcycle part as an example. Most plastic parts for motorcycles, for anything that you're going to paint, would require the same basic tips, the same basic information. It's a little bit different than painting aluminum or metal. The primer is a little bit different. I'm going to try to detail out the things I've used in a lifetime of being a painter, both of custom motorcycles and other things, including model airplanes. But using paint for my whole life, I've developed a lot of little tips and tricks that I can share. I hope they're useful for your whatever project that you're working on. But you can watch this whole thing in 4K. Just adjust your settings in the lower right hand corner. Now this is a new plastic part, but whether it's a used part or a new part, getting it clean, immaculately clean before you put any sandpaper anywhere near it. Because sandpaper will drive the silicone and grease down into the part. You'll never get it off. Simple green is good. Any degreasing agent is good. I like to use SOS. SOS, or 1000 grit sandpaper, puts just about the right etch on without making the scratches so deep that the part tends to get rough whenever the thinner in the paint hits it and make more work for you. Now there's a lot of other good ways to clean parts, especially ones that are greasy, and according to what equipment you might have in your shop. I have a steam cleaner. When I do a wheel, I always steam clean it. I don't find it to be necessary on everything, but it certainly doesn't hurt. If I had the time right now to steam clean this, if it was a used part, getting the grease off the steam is real good for that. But the SOS pads and the simple green, and then when I'm all finished with this, I'll wipe this down thoroughly with paper towels. You don't want to leave any residue on there, because a lot of times, if you don't wipe the residue off, somewhere in the future, that part will tend to peel, or you'll have little fish eyes, little imperfections, things that when you go to buff out the paint at the very end, it'll be disappointing, and you'll have a lot of extra work that if you do this prep early on, it's like building a foundation of a house. Now look at the etching. It's got very small scratches in it. If you make the scratches too big with too rough a paper, the part will start to melt and start to look pretty rough, no matter what part it is. Now, most plastic will be cleaned with M600 too as a final cleaning. Now, whenever I've had new people in my shop picking up the painting skills I've been able to impart on them, the one thing they're always a little bit annoyed about is how long it takes to get a part ready for paint. It's not a just thing, wipe it off with a greasy rag or a handkerchief or something. The prep of getting a part ready for the primer is really a little bit time consuming, and sometimes it can go on a little bit longer than you think, but it's always well worth it. Having a part immaculately clean, no matter how you do it, and without making the scratches on the part too rough. Again, that's a fine balance, and I think the balance is 1000 grit sandpaper or ordinary SOS. Now for metal parts, you use self-etching primer. For plastic, I always use primer sealer. The sealer prevents the thinner that's in the paint that's going to go on this from going down and melting the plastic or distorting the plastic underneath it. That's critical. Now some parts, it's tricky to hold the part while you paint it. If you use vice grips on a part that you're not going to see, that's usually one way that works pretty well for me. Now this is a really cold day outside. It's about 40 degrees. And I keep the paint in a warm cellar. Keep it at 65, 70 degrees. It's a lot easier to spray it. Totally shake it. Give it more shaking than you think it is upside down, right side up. Now, when you look at how I'm spraying, this is my own technique that I use. I never take my finger off the cap, if you notice that. Because what happens when you, especially these spray cans, and they are not the greatest thing in the world. What happens is you release it, and if you're facing the part and you press the trigger down, a lot of times you get a big glob or a run or something. So that's one little tip that I use. I want to get in a relatively smooth, I don't want to have more primer than I need either. I don't want a big thick coat or 3 coats or anything. There's nothing about this part I have to fix with primer. The primer is just glue to hold the paint. Now because in this day and age, paint is extremely expensive. The paint for my motor, the last one I painted, which is the MT-09, which is very similar to the R1, that paint is over $300 a quart now. So when I bought it, I wanted to make sure I had enough left over to do a little touch-up. And that's, you see the silver and the pearl and everything sinks to the bottom. This is a critical thing, is to make sure you shake, shake, shake. And if you don't do that, the paint has a good chance it's not going to match. So this, I wanted to leave this in real time so you see just how long and how that bottom where it's all silver, the silver pigment is going to sink to the bottom. Keep looking until the bottom of the jar or the bottom of the container turns the color that you're looking for, the color blue. In this case, this is a beautiful color. It's got pearl, it's got metallic, and it takes a while shaking it before you can actually see, and there's the color. And like a magic trick, there it is. So I know this is the same jar of paint that I painted other parts on the motorcycle with, so I know there's a really, really good chance it's going to be a good match. But that shaking it is critical. Another thing, bleed the compressor down, get out all the moisture every time you use it. Now, I recently posted a video of using this moisture separator. It's about a $50 accessory, and we had real good response to that. That helps clean the air, get the moisture out of the air that you're going to spray. All of the material, the guns and everything in this video comes from Harbor Freight. Now, there's certainly no one technique for painting. There's people that have very, very expensive equipment, and they have developed their own technique as professionals. The technique that I'm showing here is basically a hobbyist, a backyard mechanic type of thing. We're using very inexpensive equipment. The spray guns used to be under $15. I think they're about $17 now. The compressor was about $100. Everything, including that hose, we got a new compressor hose. That was a good investment too. But here's what's important. This is the thing. If you look back at how I'm spraying, this is a technique that works well for me. You wouldn't paint a car this way, or a boat, or a guitar, but for little plastic parts, it works great. Now, I'm holding the trigger down for the whole time. Before I get the spray near the part, I let the paint start to flow. The golden rule here is many, many thin coats, not one thick coat. Back and forth. That's why I'm leaving this in real time rather than putting it in fast forward. Many, many thin coats until you think you have the coverage. It's always better to do, even if you let it dry in between coats, get thin, light coats, the best. Now, because we're painting in like 40-degree temperature, the heat is still on in the house, so I thought I'd hang this up by the heating vent, let the heat do its thing, go have a cup of coffee, come back, make sure I've got plenty of coverage before I put on any of the clear. Now, we've used many, many different types of 4-to-1 mix clear and a fast acting. The hardener is the important part. Fast. Always want to, under the conditions we paint under. If you're painting outside, it's really good to have the fast activator. Always wear a good mask. Again, you can get this in Harbor Freight. You can get the guns in Harbor Freight. Everything comes from Harbor Freight. Don't need expensive equipment to do nice paint work. The trick of tricks is to take the tip off the gun every time you paint it. In this case, I have a jar of acetone. I leave that tip of the gun in the acetone when you're not using the gun. Empty the gun, clean it thoroughly with acetone first, and then put the tip of the gun in the acetone. Then what I do, and it's a really good trick. This is a trick that's worth its weight in gold. So after I put the clean tip back on the gun, I take it outside, put a couple ounces of acetone in there, and let it spray out any little residual paint that still might be in the gun. I want that to be clean, and just keep shake and bake until all that acetone is sprayed out. Now, once I mix up the 4-to-1 urethane, a couple of things really are good tips. Keep the hardener in the refrigerator, not in the freezer. That'll prolong the life expectancy of the hardener if you're not a professional and you're going to use that all up in a matter of a very short amount of time. If you're going to keep it over a time of years, leave it in the refrigerator with the cap on nice and tight. Not the paint, just the hardener. And again, I always use everything in my shop is fast hardener. It's 4-to-1. So what I try to do is when I'm mixing paint like this 4-to-1, I don't like to talk to anybody or have any interruption, have the phone ring or anything that's going to distract me, because mixing it 4-to-1, while it's not ultra critical, it's not a good idea to make it 6-to-1 either. And another tip, steel to mix it, not a piece of wood, not a paint stick. Some of the epoxies and some of the paints the wood will absorb some of the chemicals in the catalyst. It's a rare thing, but it can happen, and I don't know what brands it happens to and which ones it doesn't. Another thing, if you're using the real inexpensive Harbor guns, put the lid on, make sure it's tight, of course, and get some blue tape and seal the lid. That'll keep you from, if you're spraying on top of a part that's somewhere in the job, and it doesn't happen often, but when it does, it'll drop onto your part or onto your shoe. Now, on my channel and on other people's channels too, I wanted to show this. This is kind of important. The spray is starting. I don't aim it at the part and then hit the trigger. I spray into midair. Go back and watch that over again. That's a critical thing, because a lot of times, and it won't happen often, but when it does, it's really annoying. It'll put a big glob of paint that usually will sit on the tip of a gun, especially inexpensive guns like these. These guns used to be under $20. I don't know what they are now. It's irrelevant. Everything comes from Harbor Freight. There's no, in my case, because I only paint as a just for a hobby, really, more than anything else. And whether you're painting a model plane, a guitar, a boat, or whatever, these guns seem to work fine. If you keep them clean, it's no problem at all. Now, spraying the clear, the tips that seem to work, and especially when I've showed other people and given them little tutorials in my shop, you want to use it like a big airbrush. We're not painting a car. If you're painting a car or something gigantic, you can blow it on with more pressure and open up the gun like a fire hose. This, I want it to be like a big airbrush, and if that part is very difficult to explain to people, and a lot of thin, light coats you can figure out. You can see this in real time. Thin, light coats. If you tend to put too much paint on, let it dry between coats. It's really no big deal to do that. But it's really bad when you overdo it on the first coat or the second coat, and then you've got a big run to deal with later on. And we will today eventually get three total light coats on this and let it dry. In this case, hang it up in a garage. I try not to do two-part. I don't want that to gas off in the house. Always better in the garage, even though it's cold. It's a good time to have a cup of coffee right now, relax a little bit, and then come back out and see, spraying in midair. Now that trigger never comes, my finger never comes off the trigger. And it's light coats. Now, as you start to build up material on this, it's really nice if you have the time and energy. Let it dry between every coat. It's better. There's no such thing as too much dry time between coats. Not with the materials we're using. Now, I did all of this painting in one day, and I took coffee breaks in between, of course, and it would be no problem if I did one coat a day for a week. It would be no problem. Nothing bad happens, but if you rush it, if you don't let the primer dry thoroughly, that's usually a half hour, 45 minutes by a heating vent. The dry time on the blue paint, half an hour, 45 minutes by a heating vent. But the urethane, I don't want it to dry by a heating vent because I don't want the chemicals, the smell and everything, and the toxins inside the house. That's why you wear a mask. I want it to be out in the garage. Again, it's about 40 degrees out there. That's going to dry out in the garage for a couple of days. Now, virtually all of the painting I do gets buffed out, so I don't care if there's a little dust in it or a few little baby fish eyes that I can deal with. And we're going to buff that out in a couple of days with the 4CR, and we're going to really do a final buffing and cleaning with Colonite wax. This is some really good stuff. Thank you, Joe Padula. Now, the story of this part. I have not had a part on the R1 for probably 4 or 5 years. I had taken the original part, and I think it's a funny story, and put a layer of carbon fiber over it, and had that on the bike 4 or 5 years. I don't remember how long. But then I got into this thing of painting parts, and I didn't want to paint the carbon fiber part. I want to have it so I can switch it out from time to time if I ever want to make an Evil Twin. So when this is done, I'll have a carbon fiber part and I'll have a blue part, and I can always leave it off. I like leaving it off on a lot of my bikes. It makes cleaning the chain a lot easier. And again, when you do a lot of riding, and I do a lot of cleaning and riding, that it's so convenient to be able to just wipe the top rung of that chain. Look at the bottom rung is all covered by the swinging arm and everything. It's just easier. And it's, in my case, I have the chain measuring tool. I can measure the wear so easy on the top rung. Anyway, that's just personal, whether you like no chain guard, a blue chain guard, a red chain guard. I actually made one for the GS 1100 that I did all this work and I didn't like the way it looked. It didn't look like it matched anything. It wasn't appropriate for that bike. But anyway, all personal taste, no matter what. Now we're going to have to come back to this part. We're going to leave it in our garage. Again, the minimum 1 day, better 2 days, and if we leave it a month, even better. But it's going to sit out there, and then we're going to take a dedicated day, probably a rainy day, buff it out, and put it back. And I learned a lesson with the MT-09. Every time you add a blue part to the bike, I liked it better. And I did a lot of custom stuff, and I liked the blue paint. So if you're new to our channel, it's a very, very eclectic channel. Some of the things that we cover and have covered well in the past for many, many years is repairing motorcycle fairings, doing the repair work, the Bondo work, getting them prepped and primed and ready for a final high gloss finish, doing some of the lettering, some of the stickers, decals, hand painting, a lot of unique stuff. And a lot of the fairing repairs, they are very, very involved and difficult to do. I just noticed there's one. I had answered a comment from a fellow on a fairing repair video from 9 years ago, and I looked at all the comments. They were all positive, and I saw we had 97,000 hits on that video. I was amazed because I hadn't looked at that in many, many years. But apparently, a lot of people like to do that kind of repair. A lot of people are amazed at some of the techniques that I've used in model aviation also, but they're all, virtually all, out on the channel. And about once a week, we post a new video of the model railroad that's in the attic of my house. It's an O-gauge high rail model railroad. We are sponsored by trains.com. You can check out the model railroad videos. We post videos of the world travel that we've been on. We've been to France recently. We've been to Brazil and to Russia and to Germany. We post videos of that whenever we come back from the trip. We also post up some great memories of the career I had for my whole life in model aviation and the friends I've been able to interact with, motocross champions like Billy Sargent that also love model planes, and just interesting people that have more than one hobby, icons of the hobby like Bob Palmer. All of this is on our channel. And some of the people like Sparky that have contributed a lot through the internet and through the efforts to keep the model aviation sport that we love alive, including icon Doug Moon. So there is a wide diversity, and by the way, we do a lot of two-stroke stuff too, if you like two-strokes. And we always do our heavy restorations during the winter months. We ride all summer and post the ride. So it's kind of an interesting channel. There's always good information. We're sharing information that comes in. Please feel free to comment on the video. And please, if you really enjoyed the video, pass it on. And most of all, hit that like button and enjoy future videos. And thanks so much for watching.